Canadian English and American English have a lot in common, but some of the more noticeable differences between them are in how vowels get pronounced. US textbooks often classify this symbol that looks like a lowercase a as a low back vowel, but you probably noticed in an earlier section that this book puts that a in the low front position and lists this character, known as the script a, in the low back position. What's the difference between them? To figure this out, let's look at a pair of words. How do you pronounce these two words? I'm a fairly typical speaker of middle-class, middle-aged Canadian English, and for me, these two words are homophones. They sound exactly the same, whether I'm saying I caught the ball or I slept on a cot. Caught, caught. So my dialect has what linguistics calls the caught-caught merger. This is pretty typical of Canadian English, but not of other varieties of English. In many varieties of US English, the past tense of the verb catch is pronounced with a low back aw, like mine, caught, but the noun uses the low front ah, caught, caught. I like to think of this low front vowel as the Chicago White Sox vowel because it's very typical of Chicago English, where the South Side baseball team is known as the Sox. And in many varieties of English spoken in the UK, the past tense of catch has a mid-back rounded vowel, caught, while the noun version has the low-back vowel, caught. Since this book concentrates on Canadian English, I'm going to suggest the following convention. When transcribing Canadian English, use the low-back vowel that we represent with the script A for the simple vowel in words like father, box, and log. The low front ah doesn't usually appear in Canadian English as a simple vowel. It shows up in the major diphthongs, I, like in fly, and ow, as in brown, and it turns up before an R, as in farther or car. And this mid-back rounded vowel also doesn't show up as a simple vowel in Canadian English. It appears in the diphthong oi, like in coin, and before R, like in fork or short. Note that this convention that I'm suggesting does oversimplify the variation that exists in the real world, but that's okay at this introductory level. With the low vowels taken care of, let's talk about the mid and central vowels. Think about these two words, funny and phonetics. They start with almost the same syllable, don't they? But there's one important difference. In funny, the stress is on the first syllable, while in phonetics, the second syllable is stressed. This has consequences for the vowel in the nucleus of each syllable. Remember that we talked about syllable stress in an earlier section. Stressed syllables are more prominent than unstressed syllables. They're louder, longer, and higher in pitch. So stressed syllables get pronounced with full vowels. In the word funny, the first syllable has this mid-back unrounded vowel that we represent with the wedge symbol. But when a syllable is unstressed, it gets reduced. It's shorter and quieter. That means that speakers pronounce the vowel as the mid-central reduced vowel that has a funny name, schwa, and looks like the upside-down E. You can hear this stress difference between the sound in bun and the first syllable of banana, and between the first syllables of apple and apply. So being able to recognize stress is important in producing an accurate transcription. Speaking of unstressed syllables, in an earlier section we talked about what happens when a syllable is so reduced that the vowel nucleus disappears entirely and the sonorant consonant from the coda becomes a vowel. This is another oversimplification, but at this intro level, let's treat a syllable with a reduced nucleus as equivalent to one that has a syllabic consonant as its nucleus. So we'll consider these transcriptions on the left as equivalent to the ones on the right. Many words in English end with an unstressed syllable, so R is maybe the sonorant that becomes syllabic the most frequently. It just so happens that the IPA also has a way of transcribing a vowel that takes on a rhotic or R-like quality. So in addition to considering the schwa R transcription as equivalent to the syllabic R, we'll also consider the rhotic schwa transcription to be equivalent. Again, this is an oversimplification, but it makes sense for when you're first learning to do IPA transcription. Now you already know that schwa is a reduced vowel that only appears in unstressed syllables. So what about when a word has that sound in a stressed syllable, like in bird? We'll use a different symbol to represent the stressed one. This is the mid-central unreduced vowel. Notice that it looks a lot like the symbol for the mid-front vowel, but it faces the opposite direction. The only place this vowel shows up in Canadian English is when it's rhotic, that is, in a stressed syllable with an R in the coda. You can hear the difference if you compare the word bird with the second unstressed syllable in amber. There's one more central vowel we need to pay attention to, and that's the high central vowel that looks like a little crossed out lowercase I. Again, it has a very predictable distribution in Canadian English. We'll use it only in unstressed syllables where the syllable is a suffix. For example, the final syllable in heated and excited is a past tense suffix, and the final syllable in horses and quizzes is a plural suffix, so we'll transcribe them all with this high central vowel. That's a lot of details, but paying attention to these subtle differences will develop your phonetic listening skills and your transcription skills.